Thank you. And I need to remember to record for all of our friends that are not here and able to see it. So, oh yeah, I think, yeah, we're good to go. All right, welcome and welcome over to my friends in YouTube as well. We're going to go ahead and officially start our event. I know we're going to have a couple schools, I think, that are going to be joining us a couple minutes late, but to those of us that are able to make it on time live on YouTube and those of us joining on YouTube, I just want to say welcome and good morning. Thank you so much for joining us here for our Black History Month event. We have two great guest speakers that would like to share their thoughts and ideas today. And yeah, let's get right into it. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I am joining from Amiskwaciwâskahikan. So this is colonially known as Edmonton, Alberta, on Treaty 6 territory. This land is a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to many groups, including the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and the Nakota Sioux. I would also like to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're on today, as we're meeting on a virtual platform that's covering many different lands and territories that we each call home. We do a land acknowledgement to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. We must be committed to establishing and maintaining relationships with not only the Indigenous peoples of our lands, but all of the people of marginalized groups who share the land that we call home. We can all take time in our lives to move from allyship in a place of privilege to becoming accomplices in change at an institutional level. And I'm hoping that the event today will inspire the youth participating to take action in their own lives. And speaking of youth participating today, we have lots of schools joining us. So quite a few of us are able to make it live on Zoom. We have quite a few that are joining us over on YouTube. So hello and welcome to you as well. I'd like to say welcome to all of these amazing schools. We've got lots of our schools across Canada. Haverdale College, I see. St. Bishop Mahoney, welcome to you. I see our friends at St. James Collegiate. We've got a couple of our Kelowna schools joining us as well. So we've got our friends from across Canada, as well as a few international friends that are able to make it with us today. So the Metropolitan School in Egypt, welcome. Our friends in Trinidad. We've got our friends from St. Austin's Academy in Kenya, Sri Lanka. So we've got an amazing turnout. So I'm very excited to see so many people that are interested and excited about learning about Black history. So welcome to everyone. Those of us that are joining live and those of us that are able to watch this later, welcome. Just a little look at our agenda for today so we kind of know what we're getting into. We do have two wonderful guest speakers. Rebecca and Tana, they're both going to be sharing slightly different perspectives on today's topic. Rebecca is currently joining us from a science classroom, so you can see she's probably not going to be able to stay for the entire event because she is a high school student, but we will pass it over to her first. But before I do that, I did want to say a special hello and welcome to our partners at CCUNESCO. So the Canadian Commission for UNESCO helps Canadians share knowledge locally and globally in order to create better societies and build peace in the minds of all people. To do so, the Commission facilitates cooperation in the fields of education, science, culture, communication, and information to address some of the most complex challenges facing our world today. So Isabel, did you want to quickly say hello, good morning, good afternoon to everyone?
Yeah, thank you so much for hosting us, Rebecca. And I'm so excited to hear about Rebecca and Tana, who we've been working with on this wonderful project that she'll be chatting about in education. And as you all know, it's Black History Month. But we should, of course, celebrate Black history all year long. But it is great to gather virtually or in the classroom, at least, to focus on Black history in Canada and internationally. So it's so great to have everyone join us online. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being able to make it with us today. It's so nice to always see your face in our events. All right, so first I'm going to hand it over to our youth speaker. So Rebecca is a grade 12 student from David Suzuki Secondary School in Brampton, Ontario, and she's excited to have the opportunity to share her perspectives on the education system as a Black learner. So I will pass it over to you. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Bakala. I'm a grade 12 student at David Suzuki Secondary School in Brampton, Ontario, and I'm really happy to be here and share a bit about myself and my experiences. So a bit about me and my background. I'm Ethiopian, and my parents immigrated from Ethiopia to Canada in the 80s, and I've lived in the Peel region all my life. And education has always been a big part of my life. My parents are very accomplished in their respective fields, attending school in Ethiopia, Canada, and the United States. And they've always encouraged me to work hard and excel in whatever subjects interest me most. But I've always been interested in STEM subjects, especially math. When I was younger and I found myself struggling with specific math concepts, I asked my parents to enroll me in an after-school program that would help me with my learning. From there, I started working well past my grade level and reaffirmed my interest in the subject. But it was also around that time when I reached middle school when I became aware of people's assumptions about me in the classroom. Teachers would look shocked when I would explain something to another student or finish a test early, and I figured it was because I knew a lot about the subject. But I realized that other students with the same capabilities weren't looked at in the same way, not in awe like I was. Fellow students would routinely test my knowledge on things like I had something more to prove. Being 1 in 4 Black students in my grade and so young, I didn't know what I was experiencing was wrong. And going into high school, my feelings were only exacerbated by the streaming into academic classes and being the only Black girl in my math class, and again, shocking people with my understanding. I kept seeing less and less of us as I got older and into university level classes, and I began to wonder why there weren't many of us in these classes when we make up a good amount of the student population. But it didn't take me long to find the answer to my question. Simply put, finding motivation in a class where you don't see yourself is hard. You watch other students find community in a way you can't, which can be debilitating. But I got through it by seeking out community rather than waiting for it to come to me. There are Black students in these classes, and some happen to have the class at a different time, for example. We'll talk between classes at lunch or after school about our experiences and confide in each other. We see things, understand each other, and validate our feelings about things we've experienced. As much as it is tough to find the motivation, I feel that I've been significantly motivated by my peers and teachers. I've had great experiences with my teachers at David Suzuki. They've always seen my potential and never made me feel lesser than others. But I've also had my share of bad experiences. So I work to ensure that Black students don't have to feel what me and my peers have felt. I'm also very vocal about these things in and outside of the classroom, which I think is important. I'm currently training to become a tutor, and I'm learning about implicit bias in education and how it can be avoided. I plan on helping as many students as possible, and I hope to one day tutor Black students and show them that they're capable of absolutely anything. Over the years, I kind of developed this fear of being looked down upon. As a result, I found myself doing things out of spite, doing things and taking classes that I wasn't interested in because I felt the need to prove that I could do them. But I've learned that as both a woman and a racialized person, I exist at an intersection of race and gender that makes it so people will make harmful assumptions about me regardless of how exceptional I am. This helped me realize that doing things out of spite or to prove a point is not a way to live. I know what I'm capable of, and my fellow Black students and I need to rid ourselves of the burden of how we feel we're being perceived. The most important thing we can do is pursue what interests us and what makes us happy, because no matter what we do, we'll shine regardless. Thank you.
Wonderful. So beautiful. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you for sharing your perspective. We really appreciate you taking the time. And I know it's a big ask of a high school student to come and present on a global platform like this. So thank you very much. Really quickly, we do have 1 minute. If anybody has any burning questions for Rebecca in terms of her experience as a learner, feel free to type them in the chat. I did just have one question for you because you did kind of finish off your speech talking about being able to pursue what interests you. So my question for you is, what are your pursuits? I know you're a grade 12 student, so what are your plans for this year after the spring when you graduate?
So I'm very interested in both like science and the social sciences. I'm currently considering going into health sciences, but I enjoy like public health just as much. So it's kind of a toss-up between health sciences and public health. I think they're both very interesting.
Both very awesome careers. I think your parents would be quite proud with either one for sure. We just have a couple thank yous in the chat, so I just want to make sure that you notice those. Thanks so much for sharing your experience. Again, we really appreciate you taking the time. I know you'll probably have to pop up before I do my final thanks. So If I miss you, thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your school day.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, up next, I would like to welcome our main speaker, Tana Turner. So Tana is a research consultant and advocate for social justice and systems change. In the early 1990s, Tana worked within the provincial government to develop employment equity legislation and to implement employment equity within the Ontario Public Service. Since 2002, she has worked as a consultant to support organizations in the nonprofit and public sectors to understand and respond to the increased diversity of the labor market and the community served. Through her company, she also does research on anti-Black racism and provides resources to support educators to teach about Canada's rich Black history. So I would like to say welcome to Tana, and I will pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca and Rebecca. As Rebecca was speaking, I actually reflected on my own schooling. My parents came to Canada when I was 4, and I was often the only Black child in my class, and certainly, you know, thinking about and students' experiences today, you know, what is interesting is how little things have changed. I graduated from high school. I hate to say the year, but I graduated from high school in 1982. And at that time, there was a lot of streaming happening, and Black students actually, we told each other, if you want to go to university, don't talk to a guidance counselor, because of the streaming that was happening and pushing Black students into certain courses, into certain schools and away from academics. So certainly there's a lot of work still to do in education. And I do a lot of work with school boards to address the issues. So I'm so happy to be here today. And I'm always happy to talk about Black history. I remember in high school that I didn't really like history. It was not one of my favorite subjects. I thought it was so boring, that Canadian history was so boring. And it was only after I began to explore the history of Black people in Canada that I actually started to like history. And I realized how interesting history can be, how relevant history is to understanding how we see the world today, and certainly think that, you know, how important it is to include Black history in, or Black representation and Black history throughout the curriculum. So I am so happy to be here to talk about the project that we're doing with Canadian Commission for UNESCO. The project explores how Black people are represented in the curriculum across Canada, and I'll share some of the findings from the study with you today. But first, I have a little quiz for folks because I want to explore what you know about Black history in Canada. So I have 5 questions for you, and they will pop up one by one. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, they should be getting them now. I think we're good to go.
Okay. So the first question is, in which country enslaved Africans for over 200 years? Canada, the US, or both? And what I want you to do is think about what you know as fact. I don't want you to think, you know, that I'm trying to trick you. So you're going to answer a question that you think may be right, but really think about what you know about these 2 countries, what you've learned in school, and answer according to what you know.
And I did just want to, sorry, I'll just give the schools a reminder too, because depending on what device you're joining from, the poll might not have automatically popped up on your screen. So you may just have to go to the bottom of your Zoom screen just to access the poll. Oh, I see a few of you guys are getting it.
Yeah. And it looks like the students may be in classrooms and need to maybe do their own answer, and maybe there's one answer that can be polled or put in the poll for the class. I don't know how many responses we should wait for.
I think we're probably good. I think
Okay.
this is a good idea. Yeah.
Okay. So, sorry, can we share results? Oops. What was the results? Sorry, I think I'll let you.
Okay. So yeah, so we've got about 67% of us said both, and the other 33 said United States. There was nobody that just chose Canada. So
Okay.
more of us were thinking both for this one.
Yeah. And we know for a fact, and certainly through movies, through TV shows, etc., that slavery did exist in the United States. It's good that some of you do know that slavery existed in Canada as well, but oftentimes, and I've been in heated discussions with folks because we're not taught that slavery happened in Canada. And certainly while we, most of us know that it certainly existed in the United States, we often think of Canada as where people escape from slavery too, right? Rather than slavery existing in Canada. The second question is, which country had legally segregated schools? Again, Canada, the United States, or both?
So far we're getting mostly both.
Okay.
And a couple United States.
States.
Oh, and to Canada. Oh, we're getting a little on this one.
Okay,
Okay, so most of us are saying both for this one. A few are thinking just Canada. A few are thinking just United States.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. So segregated schools were a reality in both Canada and the United States. In Canada, primarily in Ontario and Nova Scotia. And in Ontario, for 144 years, the Common School Act allowed for segregated schools. The act was actually repealed in 1964 when Leonard Brathwaite, the first Black member of Parliament, advocated for this change. So the last segregated school in Ontario closed in 1965. And in Nova Scotia, it actually closed in 1983. Okay. Which country was a safe haven for enslaved Africans from the other country? Canada, the US, or both?
Okay, we're getting a couple in. We're thinking Canada. So far, only Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, that's all we're getting. Everybody thinks Canada.
Right, because what we know about the Underground Railroad, etc., slavery existed in Canada or in the US, and really part of the myth of Canada is that Canada was a safe haven for escaped slaves from the US. But what most of us don't know is that actually when the Northwest Territory, which was actually now Michigan, was created in 1787, it actually outlawed slavery, right, in that territory. So enslaved Africans in Canada actually escaped slavery to what is now Michigan. And because slavery ended in 1834 in Canada, there was a good period of time where people were escaping to Michigan, right? So there was escape from slavery went both ways across the border. The next question, which country had sundown towns? And this means that Black people had to actually be out of town by sundown or they would be physically harmed.
Okay, so far a couple United States, someone's thinking it's both.
Right. Okay. So this happened in both places, right? And we know that particularly in Ontario, certain towns in southwestern Ontario, they were known as sundown towns, and Black people could not be in those towns past sunset. And the last question, which country had the first recorded race riot in North America? And by race riot, we mean that, just to be clear, that it was white people rioting and they were destroying the property of Black people, killing Black people, physically assaulting Black people as well.
All right, so far we've only got a couple
Oh,
answers.
this
So
one
we're-
can't have a both.
Yeah,
answer.
can't
It's,
have a both.
Canada or the US.
Unless they both had the riot at the exact same time.
Okay.
But they're split. We've got half and half saying Canada and the
Okay.
United States for this one.
Okay, so the answer actually is Canada. In 1784, the first recorded race riot in North America took place in Shelburne, Nova Scotia, when white soldiers returning to the area, they were finding it difficult to find employment, and they were blaming the Black people. And so they took up their weapons and destroyed homes and property of Black people, and forced many Black people who had settled in that town to flee for safety. Okay. So thank you so much for participating in that. I just want to get some responses from folks with respect to how easy was it to answer these questions, and did you find that you knew more about the United States than for Canada?
And I just wanted to remind the schools participating, there are a couple ways that you can engage with our speakers. So if you feel more comfortable sharing your ideas with your teacher, they could type them in the chat, that works. But you are more than welcome to unmute or turn on your camera and ask and answer on camera. You just have to give me a little reaction that shows that you're raising your hand so that I can call out to you.
Okay.
So also, if you could all take a couple moments to do one or the other. Or we're all going to be very shy.
But I do want you to reflect on whether you knew more about what happened in the US than in Canada, and why is that? Why do we know so much about US history and or Black history in the US, and not to the same extent Black history in Canada?
I do see that we have an answer over from YouTube saying that they hoped Canada would be better, but they did kind of know that we had our issues too. But I think
Right.
kind of saying they had this kind of happy view of Canada.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. And certainly we have this myth about Canada being much better than the US, but certainly we have parallel histories. So much of what happened in the US is reflected in the history of Canada as well. Okay. Any other comments, reflections from folks?
I see our friend Salma from Egypt has something she would like to ask or share. So go ahead, Salma.
Yes, hello. I wanted to share that maybe we know, or I was able to know more about the United States than Canada, because mostly social media and schools and classes, United States is always talked about mostly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, but it's always the US that's talked about the most, and it's an example of everything. So I think that's why.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yes.
And certainly the influence of the US around the world, the influence of American television, American movies as well. Absolutely. Okay. So oftentimes too, people, Canadian students share that they aren't taught some of this information in their classrooms. So this really is what we wanted to study with this research project. We wanted to examine how Black people are actually reflected in the elementary and secondary social studies curriculum across Canada. And this meant quite a bit of work because there isn't one curriculum for Canada. Every province and territory is responsible for education. So this meant reviewing the curricular documents from each province and territory. And these were actually thousands of pages of documents. So what we really did was a keyword search to identify where Black Canadians were mentioned, where specific Black people were mentioned, and where events such as slavery and the Underground Railroad were mentioned. So we had 3 goals for the project. It was to identify where and how Black people are included in the curriculum, where and how anti-Black racism is discussed, and whether there are missed opportunities to address anti-Black racism and include Black people in the curriculum. And I just want to highlight some of the key findings. First of all, the curriculum documents from the ministries across the country actually give teachers a great deal of flexibility. So really they talk about, here are some of the big topics that you need to discuss. They may give some examples of how to discuss it. And what we found was that it gave teachers a great deal of options, whether they wanted to integrate Black representation, whether they were going to explore Black history and discuss anti-Black racism, or whether they were not going to, right? So they really did have a great deal of latitude. There was no place where we found that, and the curriculum isn't written that way, where you're required to teach about Black history, right? So there are different requirements, and teachers can choose to include Black history, Black representation, or not. And what we found too was that because teachers didn't learn about Black history in Canada, didn't have that understanding either from high school or from university, many of them didn't teach that information. So because they don't have the information themselves, don't have the resources in many cases, the understanding, they're not integrating Black history, Black representation into the curriculum, even when they're able to. We also found that the curriculum doesn't provide really a coherent narrative of the presence of Black people in Canada. And by this, I mean that there may be a Black person mentioned here, a Black person mentioned there, another Black person, but really students weren't left with an understanding that Black people have been in this country since 1604. Black people have contributed to the building of this country. Black people have fought in wars in defense of Canada and have made significant contributions to this country. So that information and the larger context of the history of Black people in Canada really isn't covered, right? Even though a few Black people may be included in the curriculum. Another thing that we found really interesting is that even though Black Canadians were really at the forefront of the fight for human rights in this country, and while the civil rights movement was happening in the US, we had our own similar movement in Canada. And while Black people contributed to the development of human rights codes across this country, advocating for equity, advocating for fairer immigration policies that let people from around the world come to Canada, it wasn't really reflected in the curriculum. And what we found is actually in a number of places, there was more of a focus on the civil rights movement in the US, more mention of certain people in the US and their work for civil rights than in Canada, right? So it really highlighted that there was a need for equity, a need for a fight for civil rights and human rights and social justice in the US. And it really gives the impression that we didn't need to do that same work in Canada.
Yeah, and I would love to, just point out while we're transitioning here, there was a comment, just because our YouTube friends can't see our chat. So I just wanted to make sure that we pointed it out. Our friend Analia said, it's so eye-opening. I feel as though Black history was largely left out of my education in junior high and high school. And when it was addressed, it was only done so in the context of US slavery. So yeah. Yes, I can parrot that as well as a Canadian learner, that we for sure we're learning in a US context.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And so, and I'll ask you if you want to put in the chat box, folks who recognize who this person is, right? Because we do often become more familiar with certain people in the US. I see nobody putting in the chat box, but I'll go on. And this other person, right? The first is Dr. Martin Luther King, and the second is Rosa Parks. Thank you. Yeah, right. So very, very familiar. And as I said, certainly there are the American movies, documentaries, etc., that we're exposed to. But what we found is that these people were mentioned more in the curriculum, in the Canadian curriculum, than were this person, right? And this is Hugh Burnett. And when he came back from World War II, he tried to buy coffee from a cafe in Dresden, Ontario, and the owner wouldn't serve him because he was Black, right? And he actually formed an organization that was very key to establishing the first human rights legislation in Canada, right? This person showed up very rarely. John Ware, he's a Canadian cowboy who was influential in the early years of ranching in southern Alberta. And what's interesting from, certainly we know a lot about Black people in Ontario and Nova Scotia, but Prince Edward Island, Yukon, Manitoba, like there's every province and territory has a history of, a rich history of Black people. Viola Desmond is now on our $10 bill. She did not show up in all the curriculum across the country, right? So certainly she has, and we hope that given that she's now on the Canadian $10 bill, that she will, as the curriculum gets redeveloped and revised over the years, will be incorporated into the curriculum across the country. This is Leonard Brathwaite, who I mentioned before, who was the first Black MPP in Ontario, who helped desegregate schools. So certainly these are faces that not many students are familiar with and are not embedded in the curriculum. One thing I know I'm running out of time, so I will wrap with talking about how the exclusion of Black people from the curriculum actually perpetuates this myth of Canada, right? To Canadians, it perpetuates this myth, and then to the rest of the world as well. There's a myth of how much better Canadians are than Americans. Canada has human rights, is more welcoming than the US. But even though people of African descent have been in this country, as I said, since the 1600s and have made significant contributions to this country, we're really left out of the curriculum, right? So as a result, students actually learn an incomplete history of Canada. right? We know so much about the American history and segregated housing and slavery and segregated schools, anti-Black racism that has been perpetuated around across the years in the US, but not necessarily understand the same and how anti-Black racism is perpetuated in Canada. So it really leaves students with a false impression of Canada. And it leaves students with a lack of understanding about the need for social justice movements such as Black Lives Matter, the need to continue to advocate for change, to advocate for equity in this country. And as I said, it really perpetuates a myth in our minds that Canada isn't racist and that we don't need to continue this work to understand anti-Black racism and to help to dismantle it in this country. Okay, thanks, Rebecca. I'll wrap there.
Wonderful, thank you. I would just like to welcome all of our schools participating now. We've got a chance, we have about 10 minutes before I have to do our final wrap up, because I know we do have to make sure that we close at 10:02. But if you have any questions for Tana, now's your chance to ask them. So again, a couple options, you can type them into the chat and I will make sure that I read them out to her. Or if you would like to be like our friend Selma and ask out loud, yes, you just need to raise your hand and I will pass it over to you. So I think while our schools kind of brainstorm and talk amongst themselves of what their questions are, I have a question for you. And mine is probably coming just because I have an education background. So just thinking as a teacher, you spoke a bit about how teachers are not equipped to teach about Black history because we've never learned properly about Black history. And I know that your consultant group has done work on where the issues are. But I guess my question for you is, what do you think is the solution to that? Because I know that our education system in Canada is quite broken in many ways. So what would you say kind of would be the first steps or some good steps to take to help move us in the right direction?
Many
yeah, I know it's kind of an impossible question, but I'm interested.
Yeah. So number one is embedding it in the curriculum, right? These documents come from ministries of education and really specify what it is that teachers are to teach, you know, in a really general sense, but certainly adding in Black history and Black representation into those documents will be helpful. The other thing is in teachers' colleges, teaching some of this information so that when teachers are now in classrooms, they have the knowledge, they have the competence, they have the courage to be able to teaching about these topics. Oftentimes we hear that they want to, right, teach about these subjects, but they don't know. Or they're nervous, right? They've never done it before. They're not sure how it's going to land with the students, or they're nervous about when we engage now in a conversation about anti-Black racism, right? Would they be able to manage those conversations? So certainly spending some time in Teachers College to educate new teachers, and then providing teachers who are already in the classrooms with some professional learning as well would be important.
Yeah, I do. I think back to when I was in college, and it was when we finally started to make Indigenous learning mandatory in university. So we all had to, we came into the classroom with that as part of our wheelhouse and something that we were, because no teacher is going to teach about something they're not comfortable with. And you're right, the program of studies is very vague. So you can teach as long as you're, you know, barely covering any of the content. So yeah, I totally agree. I know it's a very difficult, impossible question, but I think that I agree, is a very good start.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got one last call. Do we have any other questions from any of our schools or any comments that anybody would like to share? I see there's a couple schools that are participating in the chat. So if you have any other questions about this, now is your chance. So I do have one more that I would like to ask if we don't have any others. Okay, Oh yeah, this is interesting. So from Mount Boucherie School, what parts of Black history do you think are most important? Are there parts that are more important than others?
That's a tough question. I've never thought about that. I can't answer that question. I don't know. Right?
Yeah,
And,
I know that's difficult.
and because too, I thought, and I have a few Black history timelines on my website that folks can access. And when I started to do the research, I thought, you know, I can finish it in a few weeks because Black history is only so much. And the more I learned, the more I realized there's so much more, right? And contributions to our human rights and equity history. There's settlements across the country. There are contributions to our athletic history, our intellectual history, the founding of Canada, etc. And what I realized is it touches every part of this country. And no matter what you teach, there's a way to integrate Black history or Black representation into the subject.
Totally. Yeah. Good job on a very difficult question. I know it's so hard. Okay, just a couple more here. So when you were reviewing your research findings, sorry, I was so interested to know the Black history education is not mandatory in school. So what surprised you the most when you were looking at those findings?
What surprised me actually is the number of times Martin Luther King showed up and Rosa Parks showed up, and even apartheid in South Africa showed up, but we weren't talking about things that were happening in Canada, right? And so and it wasn't that we weren't, you know, in the curriculum addresses some really tough issues. So it's not like they didn't think kids were ready for it. They just weren't talking about what was happening in Canada. That I found most surprising.
Yeah, it's almost like the ones delivering or creating the curriculum also had that idea of this is not a Canadian problem.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly.
Okay, and last question. So we have one over from YouTube. So what are the best ways that you think students can advocate for curriculum changes in their schools or in their provinces?
Number one, I would say write your Minister of Education. And then I would go down from there, write your Director of Education, say this is important to us. And certainly in your classroom, you can ask your teachers about it. You can ask your principals, why aren't we learning? But what is, there's so much power that comes from people actually writing letters to politicians. If they get 5 letters on a subject, they know it's important, right? So, advocating with the ministries of education and with your Director of Education, I think is important. And then, within your classroom as well.
Awesome. All right, so that is all the time we have because I do have a few things that I would like to share with everybody before I let you guys all go. So I would like to say a quick thank you again to Tana. Thank you for answering some very hardball questions about all of these gigantic issues that we're trying to solve in our country. So thank you for sharing your expertise with everyone today. Okay, so a couple things I would like to share with our schools before I let everyone go. The first is actually a resource that we would like to share from our friends at CCUNESCO. I can pop it into the chat as well for you guys. Let me just copy it here. The first is actually a resource that we would like to share from our friends at CCUNESCO. So a little bit of a further resource kind of on the topic matter. You guys can check it out after the event. And the last thing is, if you enjoyed the event, if you'd like to do more events like this, we actually do have another similar event coming up. This one is for Women's Day. The only thing for Women's Day is it's kind of a junior high focus, so ages 10 to 15. So maybe our grade 11 and 12 students, not quite as much of a fit, but you are welcome to pop in and view it if you'd like to. So if you are interested in joining this event, just scan this QR code, or you can visit our website, cgeducation.org. We have an amazing special presenter coming, Irene Chikatula. She runs an NGO in Africa helping young women try to find jobs. So it's super cool. I think it's going to be very interesting. We'll hopefully have a good discussion like we were able to have today at our event. And finally, I would like to just say one last thank you. So thank you very much, Isabel and everyone at CCUNESCO for making this event possible. We love when you guys are able to partner with us because we always have the most amazing speakers. So I would like to thank you very much for making this event possible.
Yeah, and we will be sharing soon the final report that we were working with Tana on the environmental scan about what you are learning formally in at school on Black history and Black representation. Yes, it's more targeted for teachers, but I think also as a critical learner, as a student, it's really important for you to know, as Tana's pointed out, what you are learning and what you're not and what's the gap. And then we hope that it's an advocacy tool for students, for teachers, for parents groups, etc., to really look at critically like what we're learning and actually question it, as Tana said, to contact then ministries and whatnot. But I think it just starts by knowledge is power. So even getting facts on that and actually question it. And thank you to Rebecca, and looking forward to participating in your upcoming activities online as well. So thanks everyone.
And that report, yes, I would just like to mimic that as well. Like as a learner who had gaps in this area, like knowing what you're missing so that you can go and educate yourself. I know it shouldn't be your job to do that, but I mean, as a learner, I think
and it's also true, right? Like what Tana was saying, like what we learn about from Yukon to BC to Nova Scotia to Ontario to Winnipeg, everybody's learning different things across Canada. So it's fascinating to just know that what we are learning about Canadian history and how we're positioning it, so we can learn from each other.
Sure. Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much. And of course, thank you again, Tana. Thank you for sharing everything. I did pop a link in the chat to those timelines that you were chatting about. So hopefully we have some of our students and teachers are able to find those. And thank you. I know Rebecca had to pop off, but I'm sure that she will be watching the YouTube later when she shares it with her friends and family. So thank you again to her. And thank you to all of our wonderful classes that were able to make it live and participate in the chat. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and ideas and joining us on YouTube. And of course, everyone who's going to be watching this later in other time zones. So thank you again, everyone, for stopping in today. We really appreciate everybody taking the time to educate themselves on the topic. Awesome. Thanks. Have a wonderful day, everybody.